Now, if we're going to break down bar position in the deadlift, there's a couple things that you need to keep in mind. The first is that most people will tell you that you need to walk your shins all the way up to the bar and have them touching the bar, and then during the lift, you should try to actively scrape the bar up the shins and then up the upper leg. And that's not necessarily bad advice, as I understand certain lifters may be shorter or taller, and that's going to influence the actual position of the bar relative to the body. But the thing that you have to keep in mind with a deadlift or with a squat for that matter, that the bar position ideally should be linear, so straight up and down. So you're actively trying to pull the bar in, but at the same time you still want that linear bar path. So initially, when you set up to the bar, if we have our shins all the way up against the bar, and you also try and keep your shins vertical, straight up and down, as many coaches emphasize, the thing that's going to happen is that, first of all, if you're down at the bottom and you're trying to make your shins vertical and you have really long femurs, well, that's going to require you to sit your hips further back and allow your chest to drop further down. So what I mean is that, just like in the squat, if I don't allow my knees to travel forward and I have long femurs, then my hips have to travel backwards, and to counterbalance, my torso has to travel forwards. So in a squat, it will resemble something kind of like a squat morning, where you're in this position versus being more upright if I allow my knees to travel forward. Or in a deadlift, if I have my shins all the way up against the bar, and then I try and get my shins vertical and keep the bar up against my shins, then I have to sit way back and put all the weight on my heels. And it's an incredibly inefficient starting position. So a better way to approach it is, when you're up at the bar, put the bar just over the knot on your shoelaces or just in front of it, within an inch or two of that. So what that's trying to do is that's trying to put the bar directly over the midfoot. And as I talked about in my other video, you're trying to establish this tripod foot where there's these 3 points of contact. So the best place to then drive force through that tripod is going to be right in the center of the foot, right at the midfoot. So if you can position that bar right over the knot on your shoelaces, that's going to be one of the more ideal places. Now the other thing to consider is with the shin angle. Since I'm a relatively taller guy, I'm 6'3", when I'm trying to get down to the bar and drop my hips to the bar, just like in a squat, I'm going to have to allow my knees to travel forward. That's not going to be an issue now though, because we have this gap between our shin and the bar. So then as I'm getting down to position, my knees can travel forward, my shins will contact the bar, and I can still get into a good starting position here. Now, the last thing that I want to mention is that when we move the bar away from the shins, and for our initial pull off the floor, we want to be driving our feet into the floor, which is going to activate our quads a lot. If we have our shins entirely vertical and the bar up against our shins, we're going to shift all of our weight back onto our heels, and it's very, very hard to drive through your heels and activate your quads. If you think about it, like when you're squatting, ideally you're pushing through the whole foot, or you're trying to find that ball of your foot and push that big toe down and drive up through the feet in order to activate the quads. You can't really jump that high off your heels, right? That's not really getting much quad activation, versus if you're doing a normal jump and you're pushing off with the feet and driving through the ball of the foot, that's what's going to give you better quad activation. So in the case of a deadlift, if we move that bar out from the shin a little bit, then in my starting position, when I'm going to put force into the floor, now I can actually find those quads by driving my whole foot into the floor and not just my heel. So it's a small tweak. You're just going to shift the bar forward slightly or back, as the case may be. But it's probably going to allow you to end up in a better starting position if you allow the knees to come forward. And then as you're pulling the bar up, it's still going to travel in a straight line. Because if you think about it, even if the knees are forward, as you're starting to pull in the deadlift, what's going to happen is if the shoulders and hips are moving together, as the bar is coming up, the knees will be straightening out. So the bar will still be traveling around the knees, quote unquote, but the knees are just moving backwards as the bar is moving vertically. So it's kind of tough to visualize, but once you try it out a few times and you feel the difference, you feel your quads start to be recruited in the bottom and not just your hamstrings and your glutes, I think you realize that it's a better starting position and it makes the lift more biomechanically efficient. So try it out. Let me know what you guys think.